You are not hated. You are not even disrespected. The truth is much colder. You are being treated like you don't exist. No one fears you. No one pauses when you enter. No one listens when you speak. You're there, but your presence doesn't shift the room. You speak, but no heartbeat slows down to hear you. You exist, but you have no gravity. And that is a slow kind of death. Not dramatic, not loud, just a fading, a slow, quiet evaporation of significance, like an empty chair in the back of the room. It's there, but no one adjusts their behavior around it. And then, you see someone walk in. They don't smile. They don't speak. They don't demand anything. But the room falls silent. Why? Because they carry something you don't. They carry aura. That invisible tension, that emotional pressure, that weight in the air that makes people sit straighter. Speak softer. Think twice. Aura doesn't come from words. It doesn't come from titles or talent. It comes from how you exist, how you walk, how you breathe, how you don't rush, how your silence feels heavier than their noise. Machiavelli understood this. He never taught men how to be kind. He taught them how to be unavoidable, indéniable, unshakable. And if you've ever felt ignored, if you've ever said the right thing and still got talked over, if you've ever wondered why the room never seems to bend to you, this is your blueprint. Not to be louder, not to be liked, but to be the one presence they can't stop reacting to. You don't need to be louder. You need to be felt. Because the people who carry aura don't need to be heard to be obeyed. They just walk in, and the room forgets what it was saying. There's a kind of pain no one talks about. It doesn't bleed. It doesn't scream. But it never stops. It's the pain of being present and leaving no trace. You speak, but no one pauses. You smile, but the room doesn't change. You show up, and it's like nothing shifted. That's not indifference. That's invisibility. You're not being rejected. You're being unfelt. And in a world driven by attention, that is the slowest, most humiliating death. We were taught to speak louder, to try harder, to be more likable. But no one ever taught us how to make our silence feel heavy. How to sit still and still be the center of gravity. Because in this world, the silence of the weak is ignored. But the silence of the strong becomes a command. Stillness can be emptiness, or it can be pressure. And right now, your silence doesn't disturb anyone. Your absence doesn't leave a hole. Your presence doesn't pull people in. You are not broken. But you've never been forged into something people adjust themselves around. Aura is not born. It is built. Out of frustration. Out of the rage you swallowed. Out of the nights no one noticed you were missing. Maybe you've tried to be seen. You spoke louder. You smiled more. You gave more of yourself than you had. But the more you tried, the more they sensed the desperation. And the more they ignored you, because attention cannot be begged. It must be earned in silence. It must be pulled, like gravity, unseen, unspoken, unavoidable. The man with aura doesn't try to be heard. He makes others listen without knowing why. He enters the room slowly, deliberately, and even before he speaks, people shift in their seats. That's not noise. That's presence. And you can build it. Not with words, not with effort, but by becoming a force they cannot ignore. But before that, you must face the wound of not being noticed, of not being taken seriously, of being seen, but not remembered. Once you feel that pain without flinching, you begin to transform it into pressure, into poise, into aura, not to impress, but to carry weight, If this part speaks to you, if you've ever felt invisible in a room full of people, then make this video the moment you stopped chasing attention and started building your presence. Like, share, and subscribe if you're ready to leave the crowd and start commanding the air around you. And if you'd like to support us so we can keep creating videos that hit this deep, you can donate via the Super Thanks button below. Every dollar helps us stay independent and go even further into the darkness others are too afraid to speak about. Because invisibility doesn't end by asking to be seen. It ends when your presence becomes impossible to ignore. Power doesn't always come from what you say. Sometimes, it comes from what your presence does before you speak. You've seen it. A man walks into the room. He doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't try to be seen. But suddenly, the tone shifts. People talk softer. They move slower. They adjust. Why? Because of the air. Because he brings with him a pressure that doesn't announce itself, but everyone feels it. Aura is not volume. It is emotional gravity. Most people try to be noticed. They talk too much. They laugh too hard. They overperform because they fear being forgotten. So they fill every space with noise. But noise is not presence. It is leakage. It is desperation in disguise. Real presence doesn't interrupt. It compresses. The man with aura doesn't force anyone to listen. He simply becomes someone they can't speak over. He doesn't react to the room. He bends it. Quietly. Completely. Stillness is not emptiness. It is concentration. It's what happens when all your energy pulls inward. Tight. Controlled. Unshakable. And in a world addicted to speed, that kind of stillness is a threat. It makes people uncomfortable. They don't know what you're thinking. They can't place you. They can't manipulate you. So they start adjusting. Their behavior, their tone, their entire posture shifts in reaction to the pressure you're not even expressing. And here's the secret. You haven't said a word, but you've already set the rules. Machiavelli understood this. He knew the strongest command is the one that never needs to be spoken. You don't dominate the room by raising your voice. You do it by owning the energy before anyone else even notices it's shifted. And when someone tries to steal that space, tries to bring the spotlight back to them, you don't fight them. You let them talk. You let them unravel. Then you answer in one slow, measured sentence, and then you go silent again. Because in that silence, they start asking questions. Not about the topic, but about you. And the moment they ask, you've already won. You didn't touch them. You didn't threaten them. You didn't try to lead them. You just bent the room without permission, without effort. That is aura. If this resonates with something you felt before, a moment when your silence carried more than your words, drop it in the comments below, because your stillness might be the signal someone else out there is finally learning to understand. People don't fear what they understand. They fear what they can't explain. And in that fear lies power. The most dangerous man in the room is not the one with the loudest voice. It's the one no one can read. The one whose silence feels like a question they can't stop asking. Machiavelli warned us. Everyone sees what you appear to be, but few truly experience who you are. And if they do, you've already lost. Because once they understand you, they can predict you. And if they can predict you, they can control you. Most people make the same mistake. They want to be understood. They crave connection. They overshare. They explain. They become transparent. But in power, transparency is suicide. Once they know your patterns, they build expectations. And expectations become cages. You don't want to be understood. You want to be misunderstood strategically. Not cold, not distant, but unreadable. A shadow, not a mirror. Speak in fragments. Leave your thoughts unfinished. Let your sentences trail off just before the point. They'll fill in the blanks with their own projections, with their own fears, with their own fantasies. And here's the twist. The version of you they invent will always be more powerful than the version you could ever explain. You don't need to be clear. You need to be felt. Let them wonder. Let them argue. Let them whisper about what you meant. Never correct them. If they think you're kind, let them. If they think you're dangerous, smile. If they think they figured you out, disappear. Aura is not built on clarity. It's built on uncertainty. People fear what they can't prepare for. And the moment they think they know your rhythm, change it. Be warm for a moment, then cold for a week. Be available one day, then gone the next. Say something that sounds like a truth, then refuse to repeat it. Not because you're unstable, but because you are not meant to be understood. You're meant to be interpreted, over and over without a final answer. That's what gives weight to your silence, to your gaze, to your pauses. You're not just a man. You are a possibility, an atmosphere. And atmosphere can't be held, only felt. When people stop trying to define you and start adjusting themselves around you, you've already taken control. If you've ever seen someone shift their tone just because they didn't know what you were thinking, tell me below. Because mystery is not avoidance. It is architecture. Stillness is not the absence of energy. It is the concentration of it. It is power that no longer needs to move. Watch the room. Most people can't sit still. They twitch. They adjust their clothes. They tap their feet. They fill silence because silence exposes them. It reveals the anxiety underneath, the need to perform, to be liked, to be noticed. But the man with aura does none of that. He sits still, not stiff, still, like a mountain watches a storm pass. He doesn't lean in. He doesn't explain. He lets the silence become his message. Stillness is how gravity enters a room. The louder the room, the more terrifying your calm becomes. Because now, you've broken the rhythm. You've created tension. And tension is control. When others ramble, you pose. When others fidget, you remain still. When others try to dominate, you do nothing but absorb. Aura isn't a performance. It is containment. It is emotional compression, the kind that makes people uncomfortable because they can't read what you're holding inside. And so they adjust. They second-guess themselves. They change the way they speak just to match your frequency. You never ask them to, but they do, because your silence feels like judgment, or mystery, or danger, and their minds fill in the blanks. That's how presence works. Not by demanding attention, but by disrupting their certainty. You become the center of the room, not by speaking, but by making them aware of their own noise. They begin to look at themselves differently in your silence. And that is power. You don't need to interrupt. You don't need to react. You just sit like someone who's already seen everything and still chooses not to speak. Stillness is not passive. It's predatory. It pulls people in. It makes them lean forward. It makes them perform while you observe. And when you do speak, your words weigh more because of the silence that came before them. Not because of volume, but because of restraint. That is emotional gravity. Not built through charisma, but through command of your own energy. Have you ever sat so still that someone else changed just to break the tension? Leave a comment. Because that is not just presence. That is leverage. Power is not always in what's offered. Often, it's in what's withheld. Most people offer themselves too easily. They're always available, always replying, always showing up. But what's always present becomes common. And common is the graveyard of respect. The man with aura knows this. He doesn't flood the room. He doesn't fill the silence. He appears when it matters, and then disappears before he can be expected. Because expectation kills mystery, and mystery feeds power. You don't want to be everywhere. You want to be felt. You don't want to be accessible. You want to be earned. Every second with you must feel like a privilege. Not a routine, not a habit, but a rare event that shifts the temperature of the room. That's how you become a ritual. Something people adjust for, prepare for. Remember, you enter slowly, deliberately. You don't rush to speak. You don't stay too long. And when you leave, you don't announce it. You let your absence echo. Because that echo teaches them something they won't admit. That your energy was changing more than they realized. And now, they miss it. That is the power of scarcity. It sharpens memory. It distorts time. It creates tension in your absence that you could never force in your presence. People respect what they can't predict. They worship what they're afraid to lose. So vanish not to punish, but to train. Withdraw. Not out of anger, but out of design. You are not being distant. You are being calculated. You are showing them that you are not a resource. You are a threshold. A gate they have to earn access through. You don't live in their calendar. You exist on your own terms. And when you return after disappearing, they will adjust. They will lower their voice. They will listen more closely than before. Not because you changed, but because they felt what it means to not have you around. And if you've ever walked away quietly and watched someone change in your absence, tell me below. Because power is not always in what enters the room. Sometimes, it's in what leaves. Real control doesn't start with a command. It begins with atmosphere, with the weight you carry when you say nothing. When your silence becomes a rule, people obey without knowing it. Most people try to lead by forcing action. They push. They demand. They explain. But the man with aura does none of that. He doesn't tell people what to do. He simply becomes someone they adjust themselves around. Not because he asked, but because something about him makes them uncertain. Uncertain if they're being watched. Uncertain what he's thinking. Uncertain if he already knows what they're trying to hide. And that uncertainty becomes submission. They speak slower. They act more carefully. They begin performing without realizing who they're performing for. You didn't say a word, but the room is already moving around you. That is ritual control. Not forced, but felt. It begins with how you sit, how you don't fidget, how your eyes move like they're measuring the space. Not searching for approval. You speak like every word costs something. You end conversations as if your time is already late for something more important. That is presence. And when someone tries to dominate, when they make noise to pull the attention back to them, you don't react. You let them talk. Let them reveal. And then you cut in with one simple line. Quiet. Precise. And you fall silent again. Because it's not about overpowering them. It's about showing how small their noise feels next to your stillness. Control is not in volume. It's in emotional asymmetry. They are always reacting. You are always observing. And in that imbalance, they bend. Not because you broke them, but because your rhythm makes them doubt their own. You are not directing. You are designing. You are teaching them how to move around you. Like furniture around gravity. They begin to think about your expectations, even when you haven't spoken them. They start adjusting their words to fit your mood, even if you never explained it. And by the time they realize it, they've already submitted. No contract, no demand, just a shift they can't undo. That is the ritual of control. If you've ever been in a room where others change their tone just because of your silence, tell me below. Because true dominance is not taken. It's absorbed. The most powerful ruler is the one no one sees giving orders. Yet somehow everyone still follows. That is not charisma. That is not dominance. That is architecture. Aura taken to its final form. When your presence shapes behavior long after you've left the room. When your silence becomes the standard others adjust to. When your absence still rearranges the energy. You don't need to command. You just exist with such precision that everything else bends around you, and they don't even realize they're doing it. You're not a person anymore. You've become the frame, the reference point, the temperature they measure themselves against. You are not asking to be followed, but they follow. Not because they're loyal, but because something about you makes them question their own rhythm whenever you're near. And when you're gone, they still hear your silence. That is the essence of the phantom leader. Machiavelli would call it unspoken rule. You don't need to be visible. You only need to be felt at the level of instinct. They glance toward the door even when you're not there. They edit their words as if you're listening. They seek approval you never promised to give. Because in their mind, you've become the idea of consequence. You're not cold. You're not cruel. You're inevitable. And inevitability is the most seductive form of power. You don't push. You pull. By doing less. By being rare. By becoming something they can't decode, but also can't ignore. Leadership isn't about being loud. It's about being the one they hesitate to disappoint. The one they adjust for without knowing why. You don't dominate space. You become space. They act differently just in case you might notice. Just in case you return. Just in case you're still watching. And when you're not, they still behave as if you are. If you've ever stepped away from a group and realized they carried your rhythm in your absence, tell me below, because that is no longer leadership. That is legacy in real time. There is a kind of power that doesn't grow when you show up. It grows when you vanish. Most people stay too long. They over-explain. They over-appear. They try to prove value by presence. But value is not built in exposure. It's built in scarcity. Aura doesn't just come from how you enter. It comes from how you leave and how long you stay away. Not as punishment, but as a message, a boundary, a mirror. You are not avoiding anyone. You are shaping the emotional economy of the room. Because what's always present becomes noise, becomes normal, becomes invisible. But what disappears without warning becomes myth. The more often they see you, the less they feel you, the less they miss you, the less they question their own behavior when you're gone. And that is where your leverage fades. So you withdraw, quietly, without closure, without a scene. You don't vanish with resentment. You vanish with calculation. Because absence creates tension. And tension is what aura feeds on. They start to remember how the room felt when you were in it. They realize how different they behave when you're not. And they begin to wait. Watch. Wonder. Not because you told them to, but because your silence made them question their own rhythm. Your disappearance should never feel like escape. It should feel like ritual. A seasonal return. An unexpected shift. A signal that your time has weight. And when you reappear, you don't over-explain. You don't apologize. You let your presence correct the atmosphere. Like a compass resetting direction. This is not cruelty. It's discipline. It's training. It's teaching them that your presence is not casual. It's earned. It's expensive. It's rare. And rare is unforgettable. Have you ever noticed how people speak differently after you return from silence? If you have, tell me below, because that is the sign that your aura now survives without you. The highest form of control doesn't look like control. It feels like instinct. It sounds like silence. It moves like air. And no one sees it coming. You don't dominate with force. You dominate with inevitability, with the expectation you never said out loud, with the presence that shapes decisions you never asked them to make. This is aura at its final stage. Not influence, not leadership, but invisible tyranny. A rule so deep it doesn't need to be enforced. It enforces itself inside the minds of those you touch. People begin checking themselves before you even speak. They rehearse conversations they haven't had yet. They pause because your silence feels like weight on their chest. And the most dangerous part is this: they obey not because you made them, but because they can't imagine not obeying. You become the voice they imitate when making decisions, the reaction they expect when shaping words, the idea they can't remove from the edge of their behavior. You don't need to be near. You just need to exist in their mental landscape. Machiavelli said fear is more reliable than love. But he also knew the most effective fear doesn't feel like fear. It feels like tension. It feels like the sense that something larger is always present, always watching, even when it's not. You don't just shape moments. You shape memories. You reshape the structure of how people think around you. And when done right, you will become the unspoken law they never rebel against. Because rebelling would mean losing the only rhythm they've come to trust. That is the tyranny of aura. Not loud, not violent, not visible, but permanent. A quiet rule etched not into stone but into behavior, into hesitation, into silence before a decision. Have you ever watched someone follow your influence long after you stopped speaking? If you have, you know. That's not manipulation. That's not leadership. That is soft domination. And it never has to raise its voice to be obeyed. You never raised your voice. You never begged to be noticed. You never asked to be followed. And still they followed. Not because you demanded, but because something about you shifted the air. You walked in and the room changed. You disappeared and they still checked for your presence. That is not charisma. That is sovereignty without a throne. You didn't conquer with force. You conquered with stillness, with precision, with absence used as a weapon. You became the question they keep asking themselves, the echo that shapes their behavior. You are not their leader. You are the gravity they orbit. Machiavelli wrote that it is better to be feared than loved, when one cannot be both. But he also knew that the highest rulers rule without being seen, not feared because of violence, not loved because of kindness, but obeyed because their presence becomes a structure in the mind. And when that happens, you no longer need to speak. You no longer need to explain. You no longer need to appear. They carry you with them, not as memory, but as internal law. You are not the king with a crown. You are the king they built around their own silence, around their own fear, around their own desire to measure up to something they never quite understood. So now you say nothing. You step back, and you watch the world adjust itself, not to please you, but to survive the void. You would leave if you ever chose to vanish again. And if this entire journey felt like someone described what you've always sensed but never had the words for, then don't say anything. Just sit with it. Let it change how you move from this moment forward. Because real kings don't need to be seen. They only need to be felt.